Have you ever wondered what would happen to your pets if something happened to you? I know it's one of those really uncomfortable questions that we don't really want to ask, but in my years of running a rescue, I've seen firsthand what happens when there's no plan. Pets are left behind, confused and grieving, and family members call us all the time saying, we can't take mom's cat, or we tried bringing dad's dog home, but he doesn't fit in with our pets. I even had a young woman who called whose younger brother passed away, and she couldn't find anybody in the family to take his 130-pound Great Pyrenees. So I know it's not something that we like to think about, but I had a really awesome conversation with somebody today that I want you to hear. And we talked all about pet trusts. And I know when you probably hear the word trust, you think about something for wealthy people. But in reality, it is peace of mind that ensures that your pets are loved and cared for exactly the way you'd want, no matter what life throws at you. And later in the show, this guest is going to share a resource to help you get started making these plans right away. You're definitely going to want to stay tuned for that. You've reached the Pet Parent Hotline, your lifeline to practical solutions for your toughest pet parenting challenges. I'm your host, Amy Castro, and I'm here to help you cut through the noise and turn expert advice into step-by-step strategies so you can stop chasing your tail and start enjoying life with pets again. Most of you know, in addition to hosting the Pet Parent Hotline, I run Starlight Outreach and Rescue. And let me tell you, we get these heartbreaking calls all the time, whether it's somebody passing away suddenly or an older adult moving into assisted living or having to relocate someplace where they can't take their pets and suddenly pets are left with no place to go. Unfortunately, both pet parents and families assume that somebody is going to take the pet when the situation arises, but that's often not the case. Or well-meaning family members do take on a loved one's pet, but quickly realize that the cost or the time or the impact to the lifestyle is not what they bargained for. And too often those pets end up in the shelter or rescue system. That's why this conversation is so important. Today I'm joined by Cecilia Amo, an estate planning attorney, author, and founder of Amo Law Legacy Planning. A lifelong pet parent advocate and unapologetic nerd, her new book, Your After Credits Scene, uses pop culture references from Harry Potter to Star Wars to make planning relatable and help families protect the people and the pets that they love. Cecilia's here today to break down what a pet trust really is, what it protects, and how every parent, no matter their income, can create one. We'll talk about what to include, how to choose the right caregiver, and simple steps you can take today to make sure your pets are cared for if you can't be there for them. Because loving your pet means planning for their future, too. Cecilia, welcome to our show, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to your audience about how legacy is more than just money.
Yes, and I think that's what sometimes people fear. When I hear the word trust, I think that's something that wealthy people do, although I have learned as I've gotten older, they're for anybody, really. But Can you tell us what specifically a pet trust would be, and how's that different than me just putting my pet in my will?
Well, absolutely. So what you mentioned, a lot of people have that misconception that a trust is only for rich people, or I don't have an estate, because the word estate sounds like you've got a big mansion somewhere. But estate legally just means anything you own. And under the law, a pet is property, just like a TV in your house. Yeah. And because your pet is classified as property under the law, if you use a will and say something like, I give $1,000 to my best friend Jane to take care of my dog Spot, with a will, you're just giving Jane two items of property, the money and the pet. And there is no requirement for her to actually spend the money in care of the pet. It's a suggestion when you're doing it via a will. But when you create a pet trust, you are creating a legal obligation for that person to actually use money for the care of your pet. And because they have a legal obligation, it changes the whole dynamic. Jane can't just say, oh, well, my car just broke down and I feel really bad, but I'm going to take some Spot's money to use to fix my car and I'll put it back eventually. And Jane isn't a bad person, life just happened to her. But with a pet trust, the important thing is that there's a legal obligation that there isn't with a will. A pet trust really solves those issues. That's why you create the pet trust, is you create the plan for the person. You set the budget. You put the money in there. You say this money is to be used for XYZ, annual vet appointments, medications, really good food that is not the kind you get from Walmart, the more premium pet foods. You are in control. And that's the thing about estate planning in general, is it's not a fun topic to talk about, but what it really does is it puts you in control, because whether you like it or not, the government already has a plan for what happens upon your death or incapacity. And it's not great. The government plan is basically probate. It really gives more thought to your creditors. How are you going to pay your debts? It doesn't really care about the things you care about. So by creating an estate plan, you are putting yourself in control over what happens in a time when you're not in control.
And that is so important. And I've been through that personally, and it's expensive for whomever is left behind. Just to go through that probate process is expensive and cuts into whatever money might be left over. So what are some of the key pieces here? Number one would be the money. And I hate to bring up money first, but I know that a lot of people who are listening are thinking, well, I don't have any money to leave for my pets, or I don't know what I'll have, especially if I'm younger and starting out. Is the money something that I have to put in the trust in advance when I create it? Or is it, hey, when I die, I've got this life insurance policy and X amount of dollars? Or where's the money coming from?
So it can come from a life insurance policy. So if they're young, it's a really good time now to invest in one, because life insurance policies only get more expensive the older you get. But it's not that it has to be presently, like you said, it doesn't have to actually exist. You can have a trust and then put a savings account under the name of the trust, and that can be your pet care fund. And then you just put a little bit of money in it every month, just like you would for a retirement account. And that's just your account for your pet in the event something happens. And it's beyond the current maintenance. You're looking ahead to, if you're not there to care for them, how are you going to make it as easy as possible for the person who will be caring for them? Because when you pick someone to take care of your pet and you're talking to your niece, your cousin, your sister, your friend, ask these really important questions seriously, like, how do you feel about taking on this responsibility? Is there something that causes you to hesitate or something that feels uncertain? And then they'll probably say, money. And then you can say something like, well, I have a life insurance policy and my trust is going to set aside a certain amount of money that will be for you to use for my pet. Or you can say, well, I've got a bank account that I'm putting money into, and that will be all for you to use for my pet.
Right. So in any trust, you're going to name the caregiver, the person who has agreed, because you've had this conversation, which is important. And then you also had mentioned that there are ways to kind of enforce that.
Yes.
How does that work? Like, who's going to say that Jane actually does what she agreed to do, even though it's in this legal document?
So that's a really great question. And that's what makes trusts a little bit more unique than wills, is because trusts are basically, it's a legal agreement to treat property a certain way. And there is a role called a trustee, who you are the trustee while you're alive when you set up a revocable living trust. And then upon your death or incapacity, the person that you choose steps into your shoes to manage all of the assets that are titled in the trust or will be pouring into the trust from, say, like a life insurance or something like that. So that role is the person who is managing the assets, doing the administration. The caregiver can be the same person, or they might not be the same person. If they're not the same person, then you have a natural checks and balances. If they are the same person, then you can actually name an enforcer who can be the person who's just overseeing. And they don't necessarily have to be the trustee, but you really have to gauge how they are. Some people, they kind of have enough in them to do their own checks and balances. They're responsible enough to do that. Or you just want to maybe take out the uncertainty, because who knows when life is going to happen to Jane, right? So maybe Jane is your best friend and you're also trusting her to manage all of your accounts, to take some money and donate it to charity. She's doing all
Mm-hmm.
of that stuff, and she's also taking care of the pets. So you want to name some other person to be the enforcer. And then ultimately, you want to name backups. So that's the other thing too. With
Yeah.
caregivers, you need to name at least one backup, because what if Jane needs to move away for work? What if she gets sick? What if
Mm-hmm.
she has a major health diagnosis and she just physically cannot care for the pet anymore? So who is the
Right.
backup? And if you have a separate person as a trustee, they can find somebody else to step into that role. So that is something very important to also consider.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got to find some responsible people and get them lined up in those various roles. I think you've got to find that balance between who in my life is not only caring and loving and is going to take good care of my pet and treat them like their own, but how good are they with managing money too? And
Mm-hmm.
are they going to do the responsible thing? And I would
Yeah.
guess, when you think about the people in your life, I mean, how many people are there that you could trust with all of that? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably relatively limited.
It is tough. I mean, it is a lot of responsibility, first of all, to put onto just one person. And then the person who might be the most loving pet parent in your life might be just a mess with their finances. And that's okay,
Yeah.
because what you care about is your pet being taken care of. So you want to make sure that the caretaker is someone who will love them and take care of
Hmm.
them the way that you would want. And then the person who is in charge of the money is the person who can be good with money, who can be organized, who can say
Yeah.
no to things, can say,
Right.
that seems excessive. No, we need to pare that down.
Right. And I would assume that some of that has to be based on how much money there is. Let's say I'm in a car accident and I'm not able to care for my pet anymore, and I could still be young, and maybe I've got a young pet and my pet's going to live another 12 years, but I've only got $1,000.
Yeah.
Obviously, actually that's probably a good question. Like, what happens if the person doesn't leave enough to care for the pet fully because they either something happened sooner than they thought or they just didn't plan very well?
So that is why you have to plan very well, because once the trust runs out of money, the trust kind of has fulfilled its purpose, and
Mm,
there's no way to keep it going. So that's a really important conversation that you should have with the people who you're going to be working with, the caretaker. Maybe you have a financial advisor who you can plan this out
mm.
with.
Yeah.
Definitely the attorney. If you're working with a good attorney who's not just going to do documents for you, and that's maybe something we should also touch on, working with the right attorney
Yeah.
who understands what you're trying to do and isn't just going to make you check some boxes, ask you like two questions and be done with it. You
Right.
you want an attorney who's actually going to care and walk you through this process so that you actually have a trust that will work when something happens. A good attorney
Hmm.
will point things out like that. Like, so you're only setting aside $1,000. How old is your pet? What kind of care do you expect this $1,000 to provide for them? Let's put that in
Hmm.
here.
Okay, that's good to know. Before I even get to speaking to an attorney, what kind of information or what kind of questions do I already need to have the answers to? Because you had mentioned things as specific as the food that I want fed
Mhm.
or how many vet visits. What other kind of things should people be considering that would be the contents of the rules, for lack of a better term, of the trust?
Absolutely. Well, that's going to vary person by person because every pet has
Okay.
different needs. So just think about what your routine looks like in an average month. What are you doing
Okay.
in the average month and on a daily basis? How often are you taking the pet out for walks? How much food are you buying them? What kind of food are you buying them? Basically, think about like if you were to go on an extended vacation, what
Mm.
kind of detailed instructions would you leave for your pet sitter?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it'll depend. What is the most important for you? Is it really important that they know that Spot is scared of thunder? There's a million different things. And that's what makes estate planning not a cookie cutter kind of thing, which a lot of people come to me, actually most people will come to me and say, I just need something simple. And what I think they really mean is they want things to be as simple as possible for the people that they love.
Right.
And unfortunately, a simple document doesn't equate a simple outcome. Often it actually makes things more difficult and more complicated. So you really have to start with the outcome that you want instead of just saying, I'm going to get X document in place, because documents are documents. They make assumptions. And if you're just going like on an online DIY thing, checking some boxes, you don't really have the clarity to give you the peace of mind to know that it will work. So working with an attorney who is actually going to engage with you, who practices relational law, who doesn't just rush people through and create their documents. And you'll find out very quickly just talking to the person, the office. And I actually go over this in my book. There are some red flags that you'll see when you'll understand and notice that someone's treating you like a transaction instead of a person.
So I was just sitting here thinking, too, when you were talking about, the routine with your pet. I think if a pet parent was to say, okay, what are daily things? What are things that happen once a month, every 6 months, once a year? That would be a good place to start. The other thing that I thought about, and my assumption would be that a good estate planning attorney who has experience in creating pet trusts would have good questions to ask us. But end of life for your pet, I think, would be another thing.
Yes,
it's
that
like,
is
do you
huge.
want all things done? Do you want your animal to be put through surgeries, chemos, whatever, at certain points in their life? Or do you have different wishes? Would that be something to spell out as well?
Absolutely. That is a huge, huge thing. And as someone who recently had to go through that difficult process of losing my pet, and we put a lot of thought of how we wanted to say our goodbyes, and we had it done outdoors because she loved being outdoors. And something like that is what I personally would specify in mine, that it would have to happen. If it came to that, it would have to happen either outside or at home, somewhere where it's comfortable.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I wasn't even thinking about that piece of it, but there's that piece too. I was thinking like everything leading up to that, the medical interventions that you do or don't want for your
absolutely,
pet.
because that's a big decision.
And a lot of times you don't think about that until you're in that moment. And that person that is caring for your pet will have no idea what your wishes might be unless you spell that out and have that have the conversation and then spell it out in the trust in advance.
Absolutely. So, and then when you do that, what you're doing is, one, again, you're in control. You're making sure your wishes are honored. But on their end, they're not having any uncertainty or guilt. So they're not questioning, should I put them through this? Would my friend have wanted me to put their pet through this? Or would they have wanted me to do everything possible to keep them alive? So having that in there will also be a gift to the person who you are entrusting your pet to, so that they don't have to feel guilty or question or uncertain about what you would have wanted.
That's a lot of stress to be in that could be easily avoided if you just spelled that out. What would this process look like? Assuming I got my information together as best I could, thought through all these scenarios and got this data together. How do I find that right attorney to help me with a pet trust?
So in my book, I talk about a few red flags, and one of them is if you call them, you kind of say, I'm looking to establish a trust, and I want a pet trust to be part of it. And they quote you something immediately without knowing anything else about you, without knowing how old is your pet, how much money are we talking, how complicated do you want this to be? And they don't actually have a process that they're walking you through for you to actually understand your decisions. That's a red flag, because if they quote you a fee immediately, you might not have even talked to an attorney yet, and they're throwing numbers at you. That is an indication that they might be a cookie cutter, one size fits all type firm, where all the plans kind of look the same, so they're able to give you a price right away. So attorneys who do a little bit more customization, they'll have a range. And the really good attorneys will have a planning session that is more than just a quick meet and greet, more than just here 20 minutes with the attorney where they're going to ask you, to answer some questions. My planning session is 2 hours long.
I saw that on your
because
website, and I was like,
yeah,
that's intense.
it does. It sounds like a lot, but it actually goes by really quickly. The reason why it's
Yeah,
2 hours long is because we do a few things in the meeting. One, I'm educating people about how the law actually works so they have the context to make informed decisions. Because on TV, attorneys make all the decisions, usually because they're going through a criminal trial, right? In a criminal trial, sure, you want the attorney to take the lead and make all these decisions because you're trying to win a case. But if you're doing
right.
thoughtful estate planning, the attorney shouldn't be in the driver's seat. The attorney should be
Mm,
helping you make the decisions. So that's one thing I do. The other thing is I get to know them. It takes some time
hmm
to actually figure out, like, what are your goals, your values? What are the real outcomes that you want? Let's talk through them. And then
hmm
going through and actually designing the plan. So the 2 hours actually goes by pretty quickly. Some people freak out because they're like, oh my gosh, 2 hours of my life. But
Yeah.
if you do it right, you do this first part right, everything else goes very smoothly.
I would assume you have to check it periodically to see, are these still my wishes? Do I even have this pet anymore?
Yes, yes.
Do I have different pets that I've now added to the mix?
Yes, that's actually one of the things I would say is when you're setting up a pet trust, you want to not limit it to the current pet that you have. That will help
Okay.
any pet that I have when I pass away. That way
Okay.
it covers everyone. But in general, I recommend you should just look into your plan every 3 to 5 years. In my firm, all of the plans have a 3-year review included, just so that we can have that 3-year check-in to make sure that the plan is
Okay.
still working. But of course, if something major happens, and it hasn't been 3 years, if there's a major event, a death, someone moves, you have a major medical diagnosis, all sorts of things. You buy a house, you sell a house, there's a lot of things that would
Right.
trigger you just needing to look at it and update plan.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I would. And then when you're looking for an attorney, look for an attorney
hmm
that has systems in place for plan maintenance. So, for
Okay.
example, I have the 3-year review included. Pretty much any attorney that I refer people to in my network, we all have a 3-year review included because we care about the actual outcomes. It's not transactional. So the attorneys who are transactional, they just
Right.
want the fee, and you'll never hear from them again once the documents are signed. The attorneys who are
Right.
relational will have these systems in place because they want to be there when something happens. A set of documents is great, but a set of documents can't be there for your family.
We'll be right back.
Can we be real for a second? Vet bills can be brutal. One unexpected visit, and suddenly you're choosing between paying your rent or paying for your pet's care. That's exactly why I created the Vet Bill Survival Kit. It's free, and inside you'll find 10 proven ways to save money at the vet without shortchanging your pet. Download your kit today at petparenthotline.com/vetkit. That's petparenthotline.com/vetkit. Right, right. So can people just contact you and work with you, or do you have to find somebody that's in your state?
Yes. So attorney licenses are only by state. So I can only work with people in California, but I do have a very robust network of attorneys across the nation who all practice law the way that I do, heart-centered, relational, with that ongoing maintenance, 3-year reviews included. So they can
Okay.
just look me up on my website, amo-law.com, and fill out a contact form. If they're not in California, they can just let me know where they are and I'll send them some referrals.
I'm assuming that the cost to get a pet trust done is going to be different depending upon where you live, correct?
Yes, it will be
Yeah.
different. I can tell
Okay.
you that it's usually an add-on to the base price of a trust.
Okay.
I start at around $500 to $1,000 depending on the complexity, but I would look at the whole picture and then give a quote for a single fee, because that's how estate planning attorneys should work on flat fees. They should tell you
Okay.
how much something will cost before you agree to it instead of the uncertainty of an hourly billing rate.
Hourly, right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
stay away from that for sure.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening to this and saying, I don't have that kind of money, but I want to have something in place for my pet, do you have any suggestions for, what
Yes.
can I do now until I'm there and I can afford to do something really legal and binding?
Yeah, absolutely. So my recommendation is to still open that savings account and then start putting money away. And that is your savings for taking care of your pet. And then what you can do with that is either you put a pay on death designation that will go to
Mm,
your friend who you trust, who will take care of your pet, or you make them a joint owner, and maybe you're both putting money into it to care for your mutual pets. And then
okay.
once you cover that money piece, then you have to think about practicalities. So one of the things that I do is for parents with minor children and for pet parents, I have an emergency card that they can put in their wallet, and it will have who should be contacted in case of an emergency. So it'll say
Mm-hmm.
something like, I have pets at home. Please contact these people if I'm unresponsive or if in case of an emergency. And then
Right.
you'll have one or two, maybe three people on that list, and all of those people will be able to actually get into your home and take care of your pet or get into your
Okay.
backyard or whatever. And they will
Mm-hmm.
already have instructions about what to do.
Okay, that's a good starting point for people for
Mhm.
sure. And when you said upon death, it made me think about the fact that when it comes to the trust, is it only when somebody dies, or could it be? Because I envision a situation where, let's say I'm in a car accident and I've had a traumatic brain injury and I'm in
Mhm.
a nursing home, or I just can't take care of my pet anymore and I need somebody else to step in. Will it cover that as well?
Yeah, so a trust will cover both incapacity and death. So
Okay.
with the bank account, I'm glad you brought that up because the limitation of the pay on death account is that it wouldn't cover in the event of incapacity. So that's
Okay.
why the other option is to have someone as a joint owner. Now, you
Okay.
could have a power of attorney. Powers of attorney are technically what the document that is used in the event of incapacity to access your
Okay.
financial accounts. However, banks don't like them. Banks make it very difficult to use them. That's why trusts are really the better vehicle for planning for incapacity because banks don't question them. They're much harder to forge versus someone coming into the bank with a power of
Okay.
attorney that may or may not be right, or it could be 10 years old. And that's another reason why you want to update
Yeah, I
your
was going to
plan
say it
and
might
look
not
in
be
on it.
current because that has happened
Yeah.
before too. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have something that is 10
Good.
years old, that's not great.
So if you could give one last piece of advice to pet parents who are listening to this, what would that be?
I would say the question that you have to ask yourself is what would happen to your pet if you didn't make it home?
Mm,
If something happened to you tonight, who gets the call? Who has your house key? Who knows what your pet needs? If your cat's on medication or if your dog is elderly. If you're hesitating on any of these answers, then that might be your sign that you need to do something. Put a plan into place. You don't have to necessarily go and get an estate plan, although that would be ideal. But like
hmm
you said, there are people who can't do that right now. So at least have that important conversation with the person who would be your pet's caretaker and make sure that everything is clear.
That's great advice. So tell us about your book. Now, the book is not just about pet trusts, it's about overall estate planning. Is that correct? What's it called and
Yes.
what's it about?
So the book is called Your After Credit Scene, A Nerd's Guide to Wills, Trusts, and Legacy. And this book really is a result of me conducting an experiment a few years ago where I just set up an estate planning booth at a local Comic-Con. I just brought some flyers about, you know, estate planning lessons from Star Wars and Harry Potter and Game of Thrones. And people really engaged with me. They got more interested. Estate planning became less of a scary topic. There were a lot of people who were like, this has been on my mind, but, I haven't really looked into it, or I talked to an attorney and I just didn't understand what they were saying. So I
hmm
wanted to make a book that really explained what estate planning is, why it's important, who should do it, what are some of the myths that hold people back from doing it, how to find a good attorney, why DIY doesn't work so well, all the while using fun pop culture references and gaming references. So this is really great for millennials and Gen Xers. And there's really a chapter for everyone in there, because I have chapters for people who are in complex family dynamics, people who have minor children, people who don't have children. It's really important because not everyone these days, they have children. And I think people who don't have children aren't being talked to about this important topic.
Yeah, they figure they don't need it because when I die, boom, it's gone. But your stuff still has to go somewhere. Your pets still have to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, people without children, the planning is actually a little bit more complicated because they don't have a default child to leave everything to.
That's a good point.
So
good to know. I gotta get that book for my daughter. Can I get it for her for Christmas? Where can I buy it?
Well, it is available on Amazon, but if you go to my website, you'll be able to snag some bonuses. So if you go to amo-law/after credits, there'll be a page and there'll be some information about how to get some bonuses with the book. If you order on Amazon, you take a screenshot, send it in and get on my mailing list, I'll send you some good bonuses. One of them is an asset inventory worksheet. So you can actually start going through and listing everything that you own in one place, which will be very helpful whether or not you go to an attorney, because one of the things that happens when people become incapacitated or pass away is their family has no idea what they own because we live in an age of paperless statements. And how are they even going to know what you own? You know, they can't just wait for your bank statement to come in the mail because that's in one of your email inboxes.
Exactly. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like a topic that could be morbid and you're making it entertaining so that the message gets to us. And I think that's the most important thing is that we get the message about A, how important this is, and B, it's never too early to get started doing this planning.
Yeah, like I said before, you don't know what the future holds, but you can actually plan for things to go right when things go wrong and be in control of that situation.
Yes, and that control empowers you for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Cecilia, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. We covered so much. That was such a great conversation. I hope that you enjoyed it as well.
Yes, definitely. If you take only one thing away from today's episode, let it be this. Don't assume that your family is going to take care of your pets, and don't assume that even if they do, they're going to care for them in the way that you would. So putting a plan in place doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be expensive, but it can mean the difference between your pets being safe and loved and cared for the way that you want them to be or ending up in a shelter. So if this episode got you thinking about your own plans, this is your little nudge to take some action today. Write down who you'd want to take care of your pets, where your pets' records are, and any special routines or medical needs that they have. It's a small step that can make a huge difference. And be sure to check out Cecilia's book because that's going to give you a lot of great advice and information on how you can get this process started. So thanks for listening, and thanks for being the kind of pet parent that plans ahead so your pets always have a safe and loving home. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Pet Parent Hotline. If you enjoyed the show, don't keep it to yourself. Text a friend right now with a link and tell them I've got a show that you need to hear, and ask them to let you know what they think. And remember, your pet's best life starts with you living yours. So be sure to take good care of yourself this week and your pets.